So is it hot there at the moment or?
No, it is depressingly cold, 76 degrees for what's supposed to be summer. So not hot here.
We're in the middle of winter, so it's kind of a bit cold here at the moment. It's
Yeah,
free.
but it's Australia. What really is your idea of winter?
Well, we my ex and I went to America and we traveled from basically from Orlando in Florida all the way up to Manhattan in February. And we thought it would be, even though it's the off season, we thought it would be this quaint, like how cold can it, like we know what cold is, blah 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 blah. And it basically snowed the whole time that we were there, but just ahead of us, so we were always missed the snow. So it snowed a couple of days before we got somewhere, and then we'd leave, and it'd start snowing again. And we're in Washington, D.C., wandering around. And I was like, I don't need gloves. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
And then
Wandering
like a little
around. And I
later,
think, I could stand it for about 45 minutes before I was like, I found someone as like this street store and I was like, give them to me. Hey, welcome. Hello. Thank you for clicking. I'm Kevin. This is a conversation that I had the other day with Hontas, who is a trans woman in Chicago in the States. Um, I first started seeing some of Hontas's tweets. We have a few follows in common, and I kind of over time came to realize that she has a really interesting, nuanced, individualist kind of outlook on this subject. She's been around since the 90s and the early 2000s when she transitioned at an early age. So she has seen the way that things have changed. Hontus is super, super smart. She's a teacher, a lecturer, an astrophysicist. She's really, really interesting and well worth a follow. She has a Substack and a web page that I will link in the low bar for anyone that's interested. We had a general conversation, just an exchange of ideas and opinions. And I hope that, it's something that people find interesting. Anyway, I'll catch you in the next video. Cheers.
I'm honored that you asked me to talk to you, and I'm game to talk about anything you want.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Um, I was actually really excited when you said yes. I kind of, there's a lot of stuff happening in this sphere at the moment. And we're getting talked about a hell of a lot. Um, and there's just so much going on, and there so much has changed. Like I transitioned probably around the same time that you did, early 2000s, and things have changed so dramatically in that time frame that I kind of wanted to have conversations with people who have been around for a while, who have different points of view, um, have different areas of interest, and just kind of get a general sense of, what is actually happening, because we all live in these little bubbles of bias. And like I
Mhm,
have kind of
mhm.
been spending a fair whack of time, around gender critical spaces, just seeing what they're up to. And it's really interesting, just the level of basic misconception about how things used to be.
Mhm,
And you kind of
mhm.
start thinking, well, how much are you embedded in the community or know people who are embedded in the community, understanding what's going on, and or how much are you just talking to people who are talking to people who are talking to people.
Mhm, mhm.
So you actually have the trifecta, because you're trans, you're on campus, you've been around for a while. So I was just kind of just wanting to take people's temperatures and just have a general chat about, you know how you transitioned, how you like when you transitioned, how you found it, what you find campus like at the moment,
Well, like all of our stories, they're really long. The short version of my story is, um, it kind of occurred to me that transition was something that might even be possible in pre-internet. Well, pre-internet as we know it days, like it was the 90s, right?
Yeah.
I read in books about what hormones would do. Um, my mother was going through the early parts of menopause and was on HRT at the time, and I grabbed some of her, her, menopause medication, basically her estrogen, back in the day, and I eventually was able to obtain it off and on, not like regularly, when I was a teenager, and then everything was good on that front. Um, I was pathologized a little bit in high school. Back then, they would call anyone who was a little out of the ordinary behaviorally disordered here in the States. That's what they would do. Uh, I was unfortunate enough to be swept up in the frenzy back in that time, where also anyone whose behavior was out of the ordinary was seen as a threat. And I was falsely accused of wanting to kill everyone I know, criminally charged. Charges were dropped.
Mm.
Nothing ever came of it. Media actually apologized to me. Again, this was pre-internet times.
Mm.
So their attitude was, today's newsprint is tomorrow's fish wrapping. You print something in a newspaper and 2 weeks later it goes away.
Yeah.
In fact, the only way anyone has ever known about that has been because of certain people in the transgender community who have it out for me, who put it on a website to try and say, "Ooh, look what this person did." They also said nice things about, uh, you know, Blanchard's autogynephilia theory in Wikipedia and such, and somehow I pissed people off then. Um, but okay, so that was that.
Mm.
When I went off to college, um, actually did not have a supportive environment when I went off to college. And I actually, to the extent that I had transitioned, detransitioned because of the hostile environment and wasn't able to, and that was like 3 or 4 years. And I was able to come back out and really fully transition with support and medical help once I was early in graduate school and haven't looked back since.
Yeah.
So what you said about the old days back in the early 2000s versus now, I think that really has messed up the discourse we have, because people like me and you, finished trans people, medically trans people, we had to go through hell to get that medical care, right? You had to talk to psychologists for years, maybe, get letters. They made sure to check your brain out and make sure there was nothing else going on. Now, it's just informed consent. We tell you these are side effects, and you get them and you try them. And then people get all kinds of social support and accolades for it when maybe it's not right for them.
Mm.
And that could result in a lot of detrans people, and it has, because there's more people transitioning. The proportion who detrans and really, really aren't trans goes up.
Yeah. I kind of was in the like I transitioned. It was a bit different in Australia, and I don't know if it was a female to male thing or just a Sydney thing at the time. But I basically got a referral to the gender centre from my GP. And then basically, as soon as I got to the gender centre for the first therapy session, I was offered a referral to the endo at that point. I didn't have to do any therapy whatsoever before going to the endo. And then the first time I went to the endo, I got the script for well, I didn't get the script, but he was like, you can come back in 2 weeks and I'll give you a script for, for testosterone and we'll start you. But the emphasis of informed consent back then was he kind of went through a lot of things with me, like, these are health side effects that you are going to have to consider. And there may be some things as well that we don't fully understand about this yet that you're going to have to be aware of, and you are going to have to take responsibility. Like, if you want to do this, then we can facilitate that. You seem sane, you seem like you know what you're doing, but some of this responsibility is on you to, like, and I also researched stuff as well, so I didn't absolutely go in blind. But then at the same time as that was happening, there was group support and peer support at the gender center, and then at a different a different support group at the same time that I kind of opted into because it just seemed like a really good idea, because back at that stage it was still almost unheard of that lesbians could transition or women could
Mm,
transition. It was almost unheard of. Like
yeah,
the Brandon Tina movie had only just been released that year, so it was kind of very new. And I was probably the first trans man that most of the people that knew me had ever heard of, let alone
yeah,
met.
yeah,
So there's a little bit of a misconception with that in Sydney. Like, they're talking about going back to the time period where things were really, really screened, thinking that was 20 years ago. And it's like, no, that was further back than 20 years ago.
yeah. That
Because
might
there's
have been. I'm sorry to interrupt, but maybe the people saying that are thinking of they hear about the way it was in the United States and Canada
yeah,
because we're one of the biggest, most powerful English speaking countries. And they think, oh, well, it must have been the same way in Australia, right? And Australia might have been more further ahead of the curve
mm,
on some of these more liberal things. In fact, one of the people who first dug up the incident that I had in the late 90s and first put that on the internet was based in Australia. So, and they were talking about, transgender and intersex, that kind of language.
mm.
So maybe Australia was more what we would call woke about those things now
Yeah,
back in those days than the United States. Like, for example, I did not experience this, but I heard that in Canada, they would make them uh, live for an entire year without hormones at all, but they had to change their gender, their social gender. They had to socially transition before getting any hormones at all. Live
mm,
like that for a year, find a job, all of that before they even got hormones. Then
yeah,
get hormones, have them for at least a year, and then if all that goes well, get surgery. So it was like imagine having to be a trans man without
yeah,
having had any tea.
yeah. That would
And what it does for you guys is so
be real.
amazing. It's something else. And I also want to say what you said is so right. Until very recently, at least here in the States, no one mentioned trans men. And if you look on web forums or the news stories, the comment streams, and they talk about trans issues, you can show them a picture of a trans man and say, this person is playing women's sports. And all the comments are about, well, guys like that shouldn't be playing women's sports, XXXY. Well, the person is XX. What's your problem? I don't believe you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No.
It's such a complex issue that people want to make really simple, and they kind of want to jump in and share their opinion before they really understand what's going on. It kind of, you know, it's one of those things. We had it kind of depends on, similar to America. it can depend very much what state you're in as to how, like, I know in Queensland, they're much stricter about this stuff than they are in New South Wales. Melbourne used to be slightly, or Victoria used to be slightly more strict than Sydney. Shortly after I transitioned, the gender hospital in, or the gender clinic in Melbourne, was sued successfully by a detransitioner, like a male to female transitioner had gone in. Basically, in this court case, they were like, I went in, I did all of the therapy, I did the 2 years of living, in my preferred gender before I got hormones. I went through the whole bit, but I lied. And they went into court going, yeah, I lied. These people should have known that I was lying to them, that I was telling them what they wanted to hear. And they actually won the case.
Hmm.
And I mean, this is 20 years ago, so I could be. I remember it being in the media that they reported that this person had, was basically going in saying they should have known that I wasn't telling them the truth, and actually won the case. And that kind of killed that whole gatekeeping model in Victoria. And
Hmm.
after that, they went to informed consent. So, like, people are talking about trying to gatekeep this in the most secure way, the most absolute secure way that is foolproof, that will filter out, and maximize the safety for everybody. But I don't really know how possible that is, you know, you know, it just is one of those things where you kind of need to take some responsibility for your decisions. And
Hmm. Hmm.
like that, I know a few detransitioners where they were having, or they had shortly before they started transitioning, had, well documented mental health crises, that their doctors could see the paperwork for it, because they have, like in the UK, where they have universal healthcare, so doctors can see their records, and they're still pushing them through anyway, which is kind of a bit disconcerting. That they're like, you're in mental health hospital just 6 months ago, but yeah, sure, you can transition. Like, you don't need to
Hmm.
do any
Hmm.
therapy. It's kind of gotten a bit wild westy, but
Definitely. Um, I agree completely with that. And what you brought up, um, my father was a medical doctor. That's why I had access to the sort of books that would talk about what hormones do and all that. And one thing that all doctors are concerned with is liability. So it makes me wonder if the informed consent model isn't as much about protecting them from liability. See, because with the old model, like you said, like that court found, um, if the doctors are doing all of this to guarantee and then certifying that you are this thing and then you are not, it's on them.
yeah.
But if you sign form after form after form saying you understand everything and you are trans and you accept responsibility for the outcome, that's on you. That kind of makes it like every other elective surgery. I'm sure you've had some. I've currently had, obviously had at least one that everyone can see, right? Um, for surgery on my kind of top surgery, we sign forms like that, right?
Mm.
So I guess it could as much be to protect the doctors. This leads around to something you've probably heard a lot of in the United States recently, wanting to restrict trans healthcare for children. Children, meaning in some cases, in some states, they talk about children as being up to like 25. But then, for example, in Florida, they add a 24-hour waiting period for trans healthcare for adults.
Mm.
What's a 24-hour waiting period going to do for any of this? It's not like you just walk into a surgeon and say, okay, doctor, take it off, and they just take an axe and then
Yeah.
maybe take it and give it to a trans man or something. That's not how that works. It's
Well, well, yeah, it's not like you go out on the juice overnight, rock up at the hospital the next morning and go, "Hey, I've decided to have a sex change," and they go, "Oh, come back in 24 hours," and that 24 hours you have time to sleep it off at like
like waking up with a tattoo or something. Drink.
like like it's kind of one of those, there's so many knee-jerk responses that I can appreciate why people who don't really understand who this completely freaks out, like they kind of want to put reasonable, like things in place to kind of prevent people from making mistakes. But like you kind of have to come in and fully understand all the nuance before you can actually, like the 25-year-old, the 25-year-old thing. Like I kind of agree with that, but at the same time that there just isn't any real logical cohesive argument. Like you can, join the army at 18 and go off and die for your country. You can make that
Mhm,
level
mhm,
of decision, but you can't, you know what I mean? Like you can't decide other things for yourself. You can't drink until you're
mhm,
21 or 18,
mhm,
depending on
mhm.
where you come from. But
Can't rent a car until you're 25 in a lot of states in the United States.
yeah, that's probably an insurance thing, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like there just is this, like, I've kind of been I was like a greenie, like an armchair socialist person, right up until the point where I saw Abigail Shrier on Joe Rogan. And then
Mm,
I bumped into Deborah So afterwards and realized that something had changed quite dramatically. And that I bumped into, in 20 years, I had seen maybe 3 or 4 detransitioners in the entire time period. And then I kind of jumped on Twitter and suddenly saw about 100, 50 to 100 straight away and was like, holy shit, what's going on? And I have been kind of questioning it. It was kind of clear straight away that this progressive leftist politics, like let everybody do their own thing and everybody has human rights and almost zero responsibilities. I kind of realized that that was an area where this had really come off the rails. So I've been kind of like, I kind of have dodged, like jumped back to like enlightenment principles and Magna Carta and just kind of the enlightenment, you know reason principles that Western civilization is based upon, and have just been
mhm.
kind of, because I don't even know that I really understood those, that was what our societies were based upon to begin with. I just kind of took that for granted. So like I've kind of jumped back to that to try and educate myself a little bit. And if if we are individuals with human rights and like our like the founding principles of our society is individual freedom balanced with individual responsibility and
Mhm,
responsibility
mhm.
to the community, then there's not really a logical, like, there's trying to save people from themselves is not really like that. Saving people from their own bad decisions is not really, it doesn't really fit into the
Yeah,
individual freedom thing. So it's kind of like, how can you safeguard this situation and stay true to the principles of, you are a free individual. Like it's a tricky concept. Like it's like a tricky thing to put together.
yeah, I get what you're saying. And I think for people like yourself who live in places that didn't have to rebel against Great Britain to get their independence, or in Great Britain itself, saying you are thinking about the Enlightenment principles that our civilizations were based on means something different than when we talk about it here in the States. And again, we're such a big, pushy country with so many English speaking people and so much money and so much cultural influence. We influence other places. Here, you may have heard certain congresswomen talk about how we are a Christian nationalist country. The Enlightenment principles were, as a physicist, I know them the way Newton thought about them. Like God made the universe like a pocket clock, wound it up, and now it's just sitting on God's desk or something. To the Christian nationalist type, it's like it comes with needing to believe the world is flat. And I'm not kidding. About half of Americans think the world is flat. Uh, about half, maybe not the same exact half, think space is a hoax. They think you, being in Australia, are lying about being in Australia. Like, how would you be stuck upside down to a globe? That doesn't make sense. Like, seriously.
We're
Like, look
just
around
somewhere
YouTube, they'll
in
blow your mind. Yeah, yeah. And then there's the young Earth creationism thing. So that's the Christian part for a lot of them.
Mm.
While to them, being gay, believing that all races are equal to an extent, and a lot of other things are, or believing in evolution, a lot of other things are all degenerate. And they view the United States, when they say Western civilization, they view the United States as the greatest, expression of that, the shining city on a hill, as the Pilgrims put it. As when they say Western civilization, they mean us, specifically, and their Christian nationalist idea of what those principles are. Individual freedom, individual liberty here was thought of as something that is only for a certain kind of white Anglo-Saxon person and certain other types of people as needs demand. Now, as a libertarian here, thankfully, there are many people in the United States who know what those Enlightenment principles are, and we view it as a matter of self-ownership. I own myself. I'm not anyone's slave. If anything, I could maybe be my own slave. If I want to change my body, I should be able to, period. If you are of the age of majority, whatever that age is, we draw that line and we say, okay, you're over this age, you do what you want with yourself. Don't ask anyone else to help you. Don't demand other people be nice to you about it. And you do what you want. But what comes with that, not demanding anyone else be nice to you, and this is what I say to a lot of gender critical people, they will complain, they want to be able to call a man and not be called a bigot. Well, freedom of speech, at least in the American sense, means you call me something I don't want to be called, I get to call you a jerk. And if other people agree with that, then maybe you're a jerk. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's basically where we're coming from here. It's it's talking to and listening to people from overseas in the English speaking world and outside. I've come to realize what a weird, almost isolated country the United States is. And yet we have this huge influence on how other people in the world think and talk about things. And we pay no mind to the effect we're having at all. It has to be incredibly frustrating to hear that people think your country is a hoax.
Like Australians have quite a sense of humor, so it's just like I'm not even gonna pay that any mind, like whatever. Yeah, it's very clear from outside America that you are a very internally fixed country. And in some ways that can be annoying because you can be a little bit full of yourself, like as a collective sometimes. But also at the same time, I'm starting to really I'm quite into history. And you guys celebrate your history like every little thing that ever happened that's noteworthy of your country gets celebrated, which I really appreciate because we don't have that in Australia. Like our history is, you know, quite rich and diverse, and in academia it is noted, but not, there aren't much else. Um,
You don't have like a month to celebrate the history of every minority group and a holiday for every
well, it
thing the
also
majority ever did, right?
it can go a bit far from time to time, which is kind of the problem with what we're facing now. Like, this leftist stuff is,
You want to just go right for the meat and potatoes of this matter?
sure.
Like, what do you think would be the hardest? What do you think is the hardest topic? I mean, for me, it has to be transitioning children. To me, when I hear children transitioning, I think prepubescent people who absolutely should not have anything medical done to them. But at the same time, if a little girl, wants to wear blue jeans and dress like a boy, or for that matter, a little boy wants to wear a dress, I don't think that the state should be involved in telling them not to, or that a teacher should either help them to do that or prevent them from doing that. That's something that's between the kid and their parents. And once they turn to the age of puberty, if they're still doing that, then it's time to at least talk to a professional about what you want to do. There are certainly some people who transitioned completely with all the medical support in the world. Like this one singer named Kim Petras, even had the surgery at 16. She's fine.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and there's other people who transition at the age of 50 with you, which you would think they'd have all their faculties and ability to discern things, and they wind up regretting it because they, at 50, don't look so hot, or something of the sort. What do you think?
I think the same. I think that it's a nuanced individual, like if I had transition, I'm glad I didn't transition until I was in my mid 20s, but had I figured it out earlier and transitioned, I probably would have been, all evidence is, I would have been fine, and I would have thrived at an earlier age. So I kind of can appreciate, and I mean, you started early as well. And if you had had the support systems at an earlier age, then you would have been absolutely fine as well. So, like this whole blanket childhood, absolutely not. I think are exceptions to that, but I think throwing open the doors and making it a rah rah party for every kid that wants to step through, or every parent that wants to be part of the parade is just a nightmare waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think people keep talking about doctors being sued. I imagine that is going to be a lot more difficult than suing parents, which is not something that I think we should be, like talking about lawsuits and stuff like that. It seems to me that the most likely people that are going to be that are at the cold face for that is parents, which is just going to destroy families even more. So I kind of think we need to be a bit careful. Like people need to be a bit careful about what they wish for, because this could blow up significantly worse than they're currently considering.
Um, my take on trans women in sports, for example, I think that, and this is one of the things that makes the trans community hate me sometimes. I think that it really should be that you have to have transitioned relatively early in life, for male to female in particular. Female to male, it might not matter as much. Like I said, testosterone seems to be a miracle for you guys. Um, But yeah, that's basically it. If you're, I don't know if you saw the picture of a supposed trans woman playing rugby who had full, not done anything medical and had full male pattern baldness.
Yeah.
I thought that was a joke. That's a real thing that really happened. That should never happen. I'm sorry, I'm not on board with that.
I kind of think I actually think like the trans category is a good idea, but I think maybe, reorganize the heat so that trans women swim with women, but they're in a single, you know what I mean? Like they are swimming against every trans woman in the field, future, present, past, so that the trans, like, because there just aren't enough of us. So like set up the trans category so that it's kind of a heat within a heat. Because
Hmm.
when it comes to team sports, there's not really a solution. Like, it's
Yeah,
kind of going to
yeah.
have to be a no. So, like accommodate where you can so that when you then have to turn around and say, I'm really sorry, but you're not, like you're not in the same category to be on the same team, there's like, well, at least you've got the solo sports. Like we've done everything that we possibly can to accommodate your unique biological, situation um, elsewhere, so that it's, because I mean, people are going to say, "Oh, you're a bigot, you're a bigot, you're a bigot," but I mean, the evidence speaks for itself. If you go out of your way to be, as accommodating as you possibly can, then a lot of that's going to fall on deaf ears.
And I totally agree with that. It's just a matter of where we draw a line for trans men to compete. For example, have you seen Brittany Griner, the basketball player from the United States who went to Russia and got arrested? If you look at certain, and I know I don't have like the highest, softest voice in the world myself, but there are people on the internet who are convinced she is male or is intersex. There's even supposedly pictures of her, which topless, where she's flat as a board. I think we have to have some kind of boundaries, but as long as they're not so strict that they would exclude women who are a little different,
Mm.
be they like Brittany Griner, who are just apparently a completely normal cisgender, not intersex, but just masculine, somewhat masculine woman, or
Mm.
Castor Semenya, people like that should absolutely be able to compete
Yeah,
as women without having to do anything. And if you're trans and you're at least in the same range as them, that should be okay, perhaps. But if you look like Mr. Bean, or you look like some bloke, as they say in the UK, playing rugby against little tiny girls with your full male pattern baldness. Not that their looks are everything, but if that's your deal, no, you don't get to play with girls.
yeah.
That's insane. But trans guys like you, I don't see any reason if you feel like competing with biological males, go for it. I mean, you guys are awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one because of the testosterone, but I mean, we're not really, I don't know how I feel about trans guys. I kind of think if trans women shouldn't be able to play, then probably trans guys shouldn't really be able to play either. Like if you guys have to have a separate individual category, then it's only fair that trans guys have an individual, like it has to be coherent because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise you're going to have people screaming sexism. Like,
Oh yeah, I loved your idea about having like a separate heat within a heat.
yeah, I kind of think that if it's fair for trans women, it needs to be fair for trans men as well. Like, even though we are a somewhat different situation, because I think the average height for a trans guy must be like 5'6" or something like that, whereas the average height for a natal man would be what, like 5'11", 6 foot, something like that. So it is a different situation, but I kind of think in order for the average public who is not paying super attention it kind of needs to be across the board, fair for everybody, regardless, because like otherwise it just you get into the weeds with, and testosterone is a banned substance, like it's exactly.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I kind of think that this whole being like, because the principles, no society is ever going to be perfect. Like there's always going to be gaps or little bits of inequality that pop up, because that is the nature of the world that we live in, and how things work basically. um I just lost my train of thought. Like, but yeah, so I kind of think, you know making it as coherent as possible is probably the thing that will get us the most support across the board, because I don't know what it's like for. I suppose it's a little bit different for trans women, because you are a little bit, like, you're more visible on a daily basis. But like, I kind of,
Oh,
most of the places that I go, and I'm out pretty much 99% of my life, everybody knows I'm trans. Um, I
I'm very surprised to hear that. Maybe, maybe it doesn't come across on screen, but you look like, somebody I might see driving a truck.
yeah,
And I
I
mean
would
like
tell people.
typical male. You tell people, well, I mean, yeah, I guess I like for me, I don't. I used to try to guess whether I was passing or not based on the way people looked at me, but then I've had days when I'm totally done up, think I'm looking good, and I'll get called sir. And then I have days when I'm disheveled and wearing torn, ratty sweat clothes, and I'll be called ma'am. There's no logic to it. I have very few of those days when I get sirred, but it does happen. I'm not going to say it never happens, but then in the U.S. right now, we live at a time where some people think every woman over 5'6" must be trans. You know, like, like the same type of people that believe Australia is a hoax will do what's called transvestigation on a famous woman, like get a picture that's real zoomed in on her and see a little bit of peach fuzz on the cheeks. Oh, she's got a beard. Must
Yeah,
actually
because women don't
be
have
a guy.
any hair on their face
Yeah,
whatsoever, ever. Like,
yeah. Because women are just as smooth as an anime character, according to them.
yeah,
Which like they've never been intimately close to a woman.
yeah,
Just
that's probably true. I kind of have been thinking, like, literally for the last 2 days, I've kind of been thinking, like, I'm Gen X, so I remember a time before the internet even existed. And then, the beginning of the internet. So I remember a time when people, they didn't have great faith in government, but they had faith in government, and there were institutions. Um, what's the word? What do they call the print media in America? It's
the
like,
press. They just call it the press.
um, something institutions. Like, there are standing historical institutions and things that our societies are set up on, that people had faith in. The legacy media, that's what they call it.
Yeah.
Like, people had faith in the legacy media, because there are only three or four. Like, we have the ABC, Britain has the BBC, Canada has their own version of that, as does New Zealand, I think. Um, there were places where you could go to get information that you could rely upon. Like, you were pretty sure, like, even if it wasn't 100% of everything that happened, you got the general gist that you could rely on. Whereas the internet, the event of the internet, has kind of thrown up legitimate places where all of these conspiracy theories can be, proliferated through the internet, to all different sorts of pockets of, so we're all sitting in our little bubbles of bias, And I kind of have started to wonder, like, a lot of this, we need to sort this out. We're just going to sort this out. We're going to tell these people what's what, and go back to the way things used to be. I've kind of started to realize there's almost no mechanism for that to happen anymore. Like if anything, it's just going to keep fracturing. So it's like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how the hell, how the hell is this going to work itself out? Like,
I completely agree. It might be that I have no solution, but here's what I think will happen. We will all have to accept a world where people, to an extent, just get to believe and do whatever they want as long as they're not harming anyone else. Like if you're, like you said, individual responsibility, individual accountability. If you want to, um, if there's somebody who wants to believe that by being trans, it makes them a trans woman, for example, it makes them literally an XX woman who has periods and every other thing. I think that's crazy. I don't think any trans woman I know actually thinks that, but I hear about people like that saying things like that on the internet. If they want to do that and they're not harming anyone else, I don't think there's anything that could or should be done about that. If someone wants to think Australia is made up and the moon landing is fake and everything's fake, if they're not harming anyone, I don't think there's anything we can or should do about that. It's like if we assume good faith about the transgender children issue, if that child has the support of their parents, I don't think it's anyone else's responsibility to stop them. And likewise, if that child does not have the support of their parents, unless those parents are being abusive in some other way, physically harming the kid to try to make them act straight, like back in the old days, they would want to beat a boy up to try to toughen him up,
yeah,
make him hetero by beating the tar out of them, which never worked. But unless they're not doing that, we shouldn't be doing anything.
yeah. Well, there's
That's
nothing
where
that
I come down on
yeah,
that. Yeah.
there's nothing that you can do to stop. Like I've seen a lot of these, like early in transition, or like, who knows who they are really. They're people on Twitter talking about that seem to be early in transition or partially transitioning, talking about their periods, and people jump on them and do the whole no you're not, no you're not, no you're not. And it's like, firstly, we don't really know, like, just because they have an avatar doesn't mean that's who they are. They could be totally taking the piss, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like, it should be self-evident that that is not something that is physically possible. But if people choose to believe that, then you can't. There's nothing you can do. Like, you're just giving them more attention by piling on and saying no, 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 no,
Mm-hmm.
no. So it's a very weird situation at the moment. Like, it's weird because I'm not really in the community. I'm not on campus. So you're just kind of seeing this stuff through the internet. And if you're believing all of it, then it can, like, it's outrage inducing, but I'm not quite sure how much of it is actually as representative as presented. Like, I'm sure,
Yeah.
I'm kind of willing to give people the benefit of the doubt that,
And
maybe if,
being on campus, you bring that up. I'll say I've had nothing but good interactions with students, but I have noticed um, it used to be if somebody said they were trans, um, even trans non-binary, they did some amount of medical transitioning. You could see a difference, and I've had kids, students in college there who were trans, and nice kids, good students, but they basically had hair that was a different color but looked cisgender to my eye. But maybe they just didn't completely feel and identify with she, her pronouns, which is fine and everything. But like that's what I've noticed. There's a lot more. It's like the label trans is not about us transsexuals anymore. It just isn't. It's pretty much everything in the LGBTQIA plus plus minus minus question mark this, that, and the third, right?
Mm.
All of that is just the T encompasses all of that now. And um we're just the old archetype of what T meant, you know.
Yeah.
Um I've not had anyone call me a trans medicalist or true scum to my face or anything like that. That's not happened. I did have a student who said they were a little disappointed because they thought science with a transgender teacher would be different. And I'm like, why? Uh, it is what it is. But there's definitely maybe if I was at larger colleges. I teach at a community college near where I live, and also at a small little 4-year university near where I live. And maybe if I was at a big state university, University of Illinois, University of California, someplace like that, I might find a bigger, bolder community of people who would think, yeah, you're a trans medicalist. You're one of those people that thinks that you have to have dysphoria to be trans. And they wouldn't be wrong. I do think that you shouldn't call yourself trans unless you're dysphorically trans, that other people are something else. They are gender fluid, perhaps.
Mm.
And trying to call all of those other groups in the alphabet soup trans, I think it's harmed trans women and trans men. Our rights are being restricted because a lot of it is just plain bigotry by lawmakers, at least here in the States. Maybe in Australia and New Zealand, the UK and Canada. It's more about wanting to make sure that the laws they wrote 10 or 20 years ago with people like you and me in mind are really being used as they intended, and not used for all and sundry who have now redefined themselves as being trans. Or as the gender criticals of the UK put it, maybe the one thing they're right about, when they talk about self-ID versus needing to get a certificate that says, yes, you are trans in the legal sense, and you get all of these rights, versus you just self-identifying being trans, whether you've medically changed or not, and you get all the same legal rights as somebody who went through all the procedures necessary, or that were necessary when those laws, like the Gender Recognition Act, were passed. So there's definitely a well-meaning set of legislators that are like that, and then there are people like the governor of Florida who seem to think that trans women are the most pressing issue in his state. And like that 24-hour waiting period thing I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
What I really honestly think that's about, it's because there are waiting periods to buy a gun here in the United States. And that's one of the big things. They say, okay, they say you need to be 21 to buy an assault rifle with 100,000 rounds of ammo and leave 3 days to get it. Well, you need to be, 25 and wait 24 hours before you can get your hormone prescription if you're transgender now. So that's what it's really about. It's probably that ridiculous.
Yeah, that 24-hour waiting period is just really random, really, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
Well,
that's the only thing that made sense for me. I mean,
yeah,
it has to be because it's like a comment on gun control laws. Like if you're a crazy person who's going to go on a shooting spree, which unfortunately happens here a lot, waiting 24 hours isn't a big deal.
mm.
I don't know. It's it's one of those things that I'm afraid I can only comment from my limited U.S. American experience. Like a question that I would have for you in Australia, are trans women and trans men a political football in the same sense where a politician's stance on trans issues can make the difference between getting elected and not?
In some instances, yeah, we've just had a left wing government, um, because we have some crazy laws like parents are being accused of abuse and having children removed in certain states if they don't affirm.
Hmm.
Um, parents can end up in prison in certain situations, like around this issue. So there have been lot trans lobbyists have been kind of in secret, not secret, but like quietly lobbying the government quite successfully, bypassing the media. So we have a few laws that have already been enacted, um, that aren't great, that are a bit too, permissive and lopsided. Just, like it's just insane that this stuff is happening. But most people don't really realize it. And the Labor government, which is the left wing government that just basically got, put in power, agrees with all of these policies. So we're kind of shit's about to start hitting the fan here because people are waking up and realizing that stuff has changed, and they're not when they say trans, they're no longer talking about people that look like you and me. They're talking about young kids and stuff like that, which of course raises alarm bells for people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so stuff is starting to come through more and more and more and more and more, but the government that is actually in power is pretty captured. So we're kind of at the very beginning. So I imagine the next conservative government that hits hits Parliament is probably could possibly be quite reactive. Like that would not
Mm.
surprise me.
Might even go to doing what the state of Texas here in America has been doing, which is the opposite, wanting to criminalize and investigate parents of children who are affirming, which, in my opinion, is just as wrong.
Yeah,
Uh,
mine too. Like there are these like there's a problem, and instead of actually taking the time to investigate and find out what's what, and sift through the noise to figure out, this is really happening. Um, it looks like governments left, right, and centre, and people as well, are understandably just having these knee jerk reactions, coming up with policies that are obviously, like, if you know anything about the subject, it's not going to work. Like, putting parents in prison, or is like the opposite of what you want to be doing. You kind of want to put roadblocks up so that people have to really consider their decisions and take responsibility for choices that they're making and be well informed for those choices, um, instead of just they kind of it keeps seeming to me that people are just coming at this from a knee jerk ass backwards kind of, it's understandable because if half of what is coming at them is true, which I question, then, I can understand why they'd be as upset as they are. But it's like, that's not going to work. 24-hour waiting period is not going to stop anybody from doing anything if they've made
yeah.
up their minds. Like,
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. The only situation, the actual form they have practically cites libs of TikTok for information.
oh
But
God.
like the kind of things that they probably first saw on there, kind of really sketchy research and things like that. Um, but having some kind of a form that people have to sign before having bottom surgery, and then they wait 24 hours, and then they have to like sign the same form again saying they waited 24 hours. I think that would be a good thing for everybody concerned, uh, because, and just for like bottom surgery, because then no one can say, nobody told me what it was going to be like. Nobody told me that things might not go right. Nobody, because I don't want to, when it comes to bottom surgery, I almost kind of, well, I feel for anybody who had bottom surgery and it didn't work out,
Yeah.
because that's a terrible thing. You shouldn't have bottom surgery until you're so sure about it that you don't care if it works out or not. You know, like you just can't bear the idea of growing old having what you've got.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, so maybe having it in writing where the person says and affirms they understood the risk and they went through with it and it didn't work out for them and they have to accept the responsibility for that.
Yeah.
That much is on them. As long as the doctor didn't like botch things terribly, like my doctor, he made me sign all sorts of forms explaining all the terrible things that could happen if surgery didn't go right.
Mm.
I just can't. I just can't believe or imagine that a reputable surgeon would not do that. His name was Dr. Schechter here in Chicago. He is very involved with the W Path, the World Professional
Yeah.
Association for Transgender Health, as you know. Um, I think, and would like to know what you think, that if they took the WPATH standards of care and made them the law, essentially, the so-called dreaded gatekeeping,
Mm.
and said, okay, you have to go through these gatekeeping steps, no hormones or anything like that until you're at least at puberty age. You don't need to give hormone blockers to a 7-year-old. They don't have puberty. No surgery until you are of the age of majority, which is what the actual doctors are supposed to be doing according to WPATH. Just make that the law, and no one should be able to complain about it, and then move on to worrying about, if you're in Florida, worry about the fact people get eaten by alligators on a regular basis there. You know, like seriously. I mean, Australia is famous for having crocodiles. You
I
know,
was I was gobsmacked. I always thought alligators were smaller than crocodiles, and then we were at NASA when we were over there, and I saw an alligator, and I was like, "Holy shit, that's as big as a croc!" Like, wow.
yeah. And they'll
Yeah,
just be in the neighborhood creek or something, and I'll hear about an old woman getting eaten while walking her dog. Like, do something about them. Like, they're the threat. You know, we're just
zigzag.
over here trying living our lives. You know.
Yeah, you have to run zigzag if you bump into a crocodile. I assume it's the same with an alligator. Yeah, I have some questions about. I have some questions about W Path. I think they might be a little, they've done some kind of dodgy things. I think overall, like they seem to be quite sensible in the main, but around the fringes, like they've got some unique stuff in the last one that they did, which I mean, there are uniques and that movement is growing. And I met a guy years and like a decade or decade and a half ago that was into that. And I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty out there. Um, so I know that it's not a new thing, and people actually do it. But they seem quite sensible in the main, and I appreciate what they're trying to do, but I kind of think that there's also this realm of progressive politics have gotten so far now that there is no baseline. There is no, I'm sorry, but that's too far. So they're trying to accommodate they're trying to accommodate everything and do too much, and they've kind of dropped the ball in a couple. Like there are a few things that I saw in the latest WPASS standards of care that I was like, that's a bit cray. Like, yeah, but I think overall they do seem quite. What they're trying to do is pretty sane. Um, But yeah, so like something like that, probably slightly more conservative, but more conservative for children and teens by a long shot, and then for adults, making sure that like just giving them the information and making sure that they understand it, so that they are informed, making informed decisions, et cetera, et cetera. Like, because people are going to do what they're going to do, like the demographic of society that has the most access to black markets is the youth demographic. So if you
Mm-hmm.
make this too, like, if you draw a line in the sand and go absolutely not, no, 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 no childhood, blah 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 blah, you're just going to have more kids taking it on themselves, or you're going to have drug dealers becoming hormone specialists, which is
Mm-hmm.
like another worst case scenario. So it kind of has to be balanced, in my opinion.
Yeah, in my cases, pre-internet, I was able to obtain hormones once I knew what the exact medication was, having seen it on my mom's prescription bottles, my dad being a medical doctor, and my name technically being the same as his. I just went ahead and wrote myself a prescription. Um, but that was an unusual case. I know these days would be easier. There are internet pharmacies, like, and there have been for decades. People can just order hormones from Asia or South America. Some people swear those hormones are somehow more potent, or they're the real deal, because apparently they see trans women from those parts of the world who are um, exceptionally marketable in a certain kind of media. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And they think that they all look that way. But yeah, there's no way you're going to really stop a 15 or 16-year-old trans kid from transitioning in this day and age. If they really want those hormones, they're going to get them. You can try to punish them into not being trans. That didn't work for either of us.
No.
In our day and age, it didn't stop anyone who's fully trans now from doing it. It would stop anyone who's not serious about it. And I think
Yeah.
those are the ones we need to worry about,
Yeah, I agree. It's a big subject. I kind of wish that more people that were getting involved were somewhat more, and took the time to inform themselves a bit more before they started seeing alarming things that they just automatically believe because it's scary.
Now, I want to give you a spicy take. Do you mind if I
Go for your
comment
life.
on another YouTuber?
Yeah, go for your life.
Are you familiar with Blair White?
Yep.
I agree with a lot of what she says. I know trans women, like this one porn star, been Facebook friends with for forever. And when I was a different kind of adult worker, less legitimate kind, that's when I first got to know this person. Super left wing, right? Also agrees with a lot of things she says, except for one thing. Blair lives in Texas now, and I really am worried that trans adults are going to get caught up in the conservative backlash against more opportunity for trans kids. It starts with a 24-hour waiting period that I've mentioned, but at some point it's going to be, we need to ban trans adults because trans adults existing makes kids want to be trans.
Yeah,
If you're a little kid and your parents think Blair White is great and she's really telling them, don't be like me. But if you're a little trans kid who might be a trans woman someday, you're gonna look at her and be like, okay, is it okay if I be like her?
Mm.
There's got to be people who are thinking they would like to ban trans adults, and it won't be a law that says we're going to ban every trans person except Blair White. She's one of the good ones. It's going to be, we're going to ban trans health care for everybody. And everyone who's caught, like the old law here in Chicago said, if you were biologically male and wearing more than 3 pieces of female clothing, you were against the law. You know, that's the kind of thing they would do.
Yeah.
If by any miracle she happens to see this, let me say it in video, honey, come to Illinois. We're liberal, but we're not crazy here. You can buy a house here in like the southern part of Illinois. They're very red down there, very conservative. Not the entire state isn't Chicago. Okay, you don't have to stay in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah, I've already seen this. You know, like there are some crazy rad fem, extremists out there that are already, the Arons have bumped into this, as has Mars, like where some of them are being like some of the rad fems are accusing them of being groomers simply by being trans on the internet. Thankfully, I kind of think that I've had enough interaction with a lot of moderate gender critical people who they just find that whole, like, most people are very moderate, so they kind of find that extreme rhetoric just abhorrent. Like most people that I've interacted with, even if they don't really love, like I just did an interview with a Catholic guy in northern Queensland, and I'm sure he is not a fan of trans at all, but he understands the basic principles of individual freedom. So he understands that I have a right to exist. And any like that, a lot of that leftist rhetoric goes against the basic principles of what our societies are founded upon. So I kind of think that so long as the people that are saying that stay as crazy as they are, I don't think there's, like I get that it's a little bit, it can be really confronting, but I think most people can be relied upon to see crazy, like to recognize crazy when they see it. Like I could
I I envy you for being from a country so sane that it allows you to think that. Again, I come from the country where there are a surprising number of people that think the world is flat, and when people either that your country is a hoax or that if you were to fly from Australia to South America, for example, they think that there's a big conspiracy to put everyone on the plane to sleep so you don't notice the extra flight time that flying on a flat Earth would take. Yeah, that's how
I've only met.
There's a lot of crazy in this world, and you'd be surprised the influence crazy can get. I hope you're right. God, I hope you're right. For all of our
I've bumped into
right.
dozens and dozens of ex-gender criticals at this point because they're like, listen, they come in, they get peak trans, they see the craziness, then they go into gender critical spaces, see the craziness, bump into sane trans people and go, oh my God, oh, okay, so this is a complex issue, excellent. And they start, like they may not agree on everything, that's perfectly fine, but they find a balance and they're like, all right, these are the issues that I care about. And you guys, there's nothing that we can do about you guys. So, yeah, time will tell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well,
but I think that people need to be a lot more informed and a bit more careful with, what they're talking about.
I completely agree.
If they want to be
more real information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I should let you go. Thank you so much for this.
It's been a pleasure. If you ever want to talk about anything again,
keep in touch.
Yeah, please. And thank you very much for the opportunity to say my piece.
No worries. Thank you very much for coming on.
Okay. You
have a good evening.
Rest of your day.
You too.
Bye-bye.